Welcome to Inside Games Daily, the only gaming news show brave enough to one-up Nintendo. So if you think a Switch 2 is expensive, just go buy one of those water ring toy things.
Yeah, I love you squish them and then the little rings have to fall in the pegs. Hours of entertainment for perhaps a neurospicy young lad. Or just go find a nice stick. You don't need Zelda, that's too expensive. Just go start swinging a stick out in nature. Something weird's gonna happen, I promise.
What Lawrence is referring to is Nintendo said some pretty interesting things about the Switch 2 and Switch 1. Canadian outlet CBC News attended a media roundtable with Nintendo of America President Doug Bowser last Wednesday.
Notably this, like all the other interviews that we're slowly getting trickling headlines out of, they occurred before the tariff announcement that ultimately delayed the pre-order starts here in the United States and now even in Canada. So we're sorry for that, in addition to so much more.
Doug Bowser chummed the waters by suggesting anyone upset with the Nintendo Switch 2 price could simply buy a Switch 1.
Yeah, yep. What's old is new again, huh? Okay, so here's the quote. We recognize there are some people that may not be able to afford the Switch 2's price point. That's why we wanted to make the other Switch platforms available, so people still have an opportunity to come into our gaming universe, be a part of these characters in these worlds, and see value, if you will, in whatever rung of the platform they come in.
Buy the old shit, because you're broke.
It's cheaper. And old and busted. Some kid is like teethed on it for a couple of months, and now it's used in a GameStop for $80. Get that instead, you filthy peasant.
He reiterated, as many Nintendo executives have since the announcement, that they price the system and games according to their value.
And here's another quote. As we looked at Nintendo Switch 2, and you think about the feature sets that I talked about, we believe that the pricing is appropriate for the value of the machine and the gameplay experience overall.
Okay, sure. Many pointed out the similarity to a sentiment expressed by Don Matrick.
Sweet Don Matrick, yeah.
I love Don Matrick. Way back during the disastrous Xbox One launch campaign. Lawrence, this is like one of your favorite things of all time, isn't it?
Yes, yeah. It's to me, that was pretty peak executives at Microsoft running the Xbox brand as opposed to somebody that actually knows how to talk to and excite a core market. And yeah, the Switch 2 is certainly ringing some old bells. I mean, we even were joking about the Kinect when Nintendo was talking about the webcam. So here's the Switch 2 that has a generous portion of its reveal dedicated to social aspects like video chatting and a webcam that just sits on your living room entertainment center. So yeah, there's some familiar feelings here. Also, we didn't necessarily see a killer app, like a game that just blows us away. Very, very similar to the Xbox One as well. Just a bunch of janky Kinect crap and a Halo. Was there a Halo at Xbox One launch? I don't even remember.
I don't even think there. Who knows?
I gotta look it up now. Killer Instinct. That's right.
That was their number one?
Oh, that was Sunset Overdrive.
Oh.
And Rise, Son of Rome. Dead Rising 3, Crimson Dragon, Call of Duty, Ghosts.
Oh, Ghosts was a fucking joke. There's no Halo in there? Wow.
Yeah, no, it wasn't a launch title. Battlefield 4, after it got patched for like 6 months.
To be fair, again, when we watched the Switch 2 Direct, I was super excited about the Donkey Kong game. That looked cool. Not a killer app. And then Mario Kart World also looked cool until they said it was $80. So like, it's kind of one of those things where I was like, okay, well, those are neat. But they've done such a good job of tamping down our excitement because of all of these price announcements and tariffs and like all this other bullshit that we have to deal with just to play this system, which, I mean, like if I'm a Nintendo executive, it's exactly the opposite of what I want. And you know, Doug Bowser going out here and being like, just buy the old one. Like, that is the most out of touch thing you can say. And it's such a bummer, too, because generally Nintendo's pretty good at this stuff.
They are. And I think there are a couple of distinctions. So certainly as the core audience, I think we could identify ourselves as, certainly through Nintendo's eyes, I think we're core of the core. We tend to think, and historically, I think it's been an issue if the core is not excited. Because the core is usually the early adopters. And if they're not the ones picking up the new thing, and if they're not sold on it yet, you're probably in for a tough time convincing the mass audience that it's also worth it. And I think we've seen that bear out with the Xbox One. They tried to pitch all this connectivity that the core just did not give a shit about. So is that still true? That's where my mind kind of splits. Historically, you know, I'm getting this feeling that most people aren't going to go for the Switch 2, especially not now. You know, the economy and all. But But if anyone can break that trend, it's Nintendo, right? And I think that logic actually does hold for Nintendo. It may hold a little too well. I can see a lot of families and maybe the households that already have 1 or 2 Switches, and they already have 2 or 3 cartridges of Mario Kart floating around the house. Yeah, I don't see a compelling reason for them to buy a, console that may end up being twice as expensive for a game that only looks just a tiny bit better than the one they've already had and invested in, and their kids are still enjoying just good enough. You don't need a higher resolution for an 8-year-old to be delighted at Mario Kart. So I think the sales proposition for a new platform ought to be very clear and very convincing, and I don't think we've seen that for the Switch 2 yet, which is a bummer because it is kind of a cool little kit. It's a fun little gadget, but I don't think that moves hardware anymore.
Yeah, Lawrence, you're right on. I want to take a step back too, because this is the talk that, kind of put Xbox where they are now. It started at the beginning of the end for Xbox. Now, I'm not saying Nintendo is different because they don't have direct competitors like Xbox did at the time with PlayStation. But this is the sort of talk that I'm also seeing, or I've seen in the past from Ubisoft executives. And now anytime you play a game that's Ubisoft related, not even developed by Ubisoft, people just shit all over Ubisoft to talk about quadruple A and talk about how one of their executives said you don't get used to not owning your games. It's all these things are now following them around, and it's the same with Nintendo. Nintendo's rake stepping over and over and over, and I don't want to see that from them. I really don't. I would love for them to be because if anything, they're going to do. I think what was it, the 3DS? They lowered the price eventually. They're gonna release the Switch 2 in June. They'll wait to see how the sales are, and then if anything, they'll lower the price probably after a month or two, just like they did with the 3DS. That Nintendo, if there's one thing Nintendo does, it's that they follow their own playbook. So if nobody buys this thing, they will lower the price. So they're just going to ruin their brand in the process. So everyone, all of them should just be let's just not say anything. Let's just talk about the games, talk about the system. Don't talk about how you could buy a Switch 1 if this is too expensive and all these executives sitting around, these $100 million worth executives being just buy the old one. Nothing is more out of touch than that, and it makes people even more angry than it used to in the past.
Yeah, out of touch is the exact right phrase for us, for the audience that's hearing that. If we are investors and Nintendo was we have a variety of products at every range for people, no matter how poor they are, to get into our ecosystem and essentially sign into our digital networks, which was the big thing with the Xbox One. They lost a lot of momentum when a lot of console gamers were shifting their perspective on ownership to digital, or rather that rug got pulled out from under them and they didn't notice. But everybody got on PSN, and now Sony gets all those wonderful PSN dollars. Nintendo's thinking along the same lines, and unlike Xbox, really, I think they've done a decent job at onboarding people into their digital ecosystem on Switch 1, and I think it's still a pretty viable entry point for people that for some reason have never bought a Switch before. And they're kind of right that there are some good games coming out for Switch 1. Prime 4, Metro Prime 4. I don't think Tomodachi Life or Rhythm Heaven are gonna send anyone racing out to the stores, but it is sort of there is some investment in vibrance, and there's probably going to continue to be some cross-platform software there. So it's not a dead platform as immediately as old platforms used to be. There is some continuity there. But Nintendo's never been good at talking to the core. Never ever, I don't think. Occasionally I think an executive might get it and know how to phrase things, but that's not how to do it, especially when everybody's already kind of everyone's not feeling great, I think, right now. And also it's funny too, because I've seen some similar sentiments, or I've seen some people expressing I've seen some people observing, and I think correctly observing, that when Sony announced the PS5 price, there wasn't this it's too expensive wave of negativity kind of flowing out. And I honestly think inflation is probably the biggest thing there. The sticker shock after 4 years of inflation really hurts. And then, tariffs on top of that. Who knows what's going to shake out there. So I think the perspectives are different. We're also not staring down the barrel of quarantine anymore. So life is different now. And Nintendo's still out there just kind of operating in their bubble. I guess we'll see, because, Nintendo did not convince the core with the Wii, and it still went on to sell a ton. So is that what they're going to do with the Switch 2? I haven't seen any factor that'll draw like a novice gamer or a non-core gamer to the Switch 2 yet. But we haven't seen it all. There's still that Mario Kart World Direct. Maybe there'll be some just like stellar feature that'll blow our minds and make the Switch 2 an unavoidable purchase. Do you see that happening, Bruce? If you get like 45 minutes of Mario Kart footage, is it gonna burrow its way into your wallet and get $500 out of it?
You said it earlier, Lawrence. This is a different world. And with the PlayStation coming out right at during quarantine, by the way, people had a lot of money then. So it was like, well, yeah, no problem, right? This is it's literally the opposite right now. There is no quarantine, so we don't have to force ourselves to play video games. And nobody has any money. So this is exactly the opposite. Even if Mario Kart World came out and this thing will suck your dick. Like $80, dude. $80 is going to stick in everybody's mind. And everyone's going to give it a second thought. At least, again, for the core audience, the early adopters. And what's interesting is that I used to think, early adopters, no big deal, right? If it gets to the mass market, it'll sell regardless of what the early adopters think, and that is not always the case. A good example is Battlefield, my favorite franchise. Battlefield has always had this problem where if they launch poorly, then the early adopters and the core audience get super mad at it, and then it's just article after article about how bad Battlefield is. And this actually does push out to the people that only kind of know what Battlefield is and would buy it otherwise. Then they start to see occasionally like a random headline, or their friend says, this was really shitty, don't buy it. And that does happen more often than I thought. So the more that Nintendo does these sorts of headlines, the worse this is going to get. And it's funny because on the one hand, it's hilarious that we're reporting on Nintendo for the 5th time in a row or whatever. But also I'm like, shut the fuck up.
Well, I mean, they already did all the talking, which is kind of funny in this case, because I think it's an underwhelmed audience creates a fertile ground for negative headlines. So I think it's a question of maybe pouring back through all the interviews that have gone on. What I've noticed is a lot of these interviews have posted like basically when their media embargo was up. And then in the days since, other outlets will comb those interviews, find like this one quote, and pull it out with a really good headline, which is what we're doing now. So, but you're right, Bruce. This is how narratives form. And if the narrative forms that the Switch 2 is just not worth it, then then somebody who's not so into it is going to ask their gamer friend who's been following the headlines, and they're going to say, overpriced, who cares about Mario Kart? And they'll be like, okay, well, maybe I'll wait. And that's how Nintendo loses a sale. Although, I mean, you talk about not having disposable income, though. My fucking alert went off for a 5090 this morning. It is $3,600 now with tariffs, and it's sold out immediately. Yeah, so it's like easily $1,000 over MSRP, and it's still just getting snapped up as soon as it hits the market.
Oh my god! Holy shit.
Now again, different audiences. The people buying a 5090 for like 60% over retail are not the people who are theoretically going to buy a Switch 2, but someone out there's got a lot of money. So I don't know. There's still some disposable cash floating around. People aren't like, the market isn't that panicked. If that's the indicator I have to go on, which is, it's the smallest data set to blow up into a giant assumption, but it's scary to think about, man. And which really makes me wonder, like maybe those people maybe just have piles of disposable income from somewhere, or credit cards they haven't maxed out, and they're willing to spend it still.
Or it's scalpers buying this and trying to resell it. That's crazy.
That's all I can figure. Yeah, because the like StockX 5090 is going for like $4,000, $4,500, and this is for a card that's like $2K retail.
Oh my gosh, this is a nightmare. We are living in a nightmare right now. But thank God we have Inside Games patrons supporting our Patreon who make it less of a nightmare every day, like Brian Cosner, who actually immediately bought 2 Switch 1s and then taped them together so that he had a Switch 2, because there's two Switches together.
Gaming on both sides. I like touchscreen on the back and use the buttons on the front.